Prime Minister Narendra Modi doesn't often talk to the press or give interviews, but sometimes he does, and he does them in a flurry, as on the eve of a general election. So he'd done a bunch of these on the eve of the 2019 general elections. And one of the things that stood out, at least to me, in those interviews was something that he said to Rahul Joshi of Network 18 Group. He said that, look, so many leaders have come and gone, and they have made a big impact on Indian politics. Those are not leaders of the Nehru-Gandhi clan, but we know so little about them. And he had then mentioned people like Chandrasekhar, former Prime Minister, Charan Singh, again former Prime Minister, and some others. So that gave us the cue. So as and when, using anniversary of one of these great leaders and titans of Indian political history, we talk about them in our episodes of Cut the Clutter, as and when we get an opportunity. So there are two of these whose anniversaries actually fall within these 2 days, this Thursday and Friday. That is Chaudhry Charan Singh, the former Prime Minister, the only Prime Minister never to face or win a vote of confidence in Parliament. His birth anniversary fell yesterday on 3rd of December. And Periyar. Periyar is the great founder of the Dravidian movement in Tamil Nadu, DMK, ADMK, everybody, all Dravid political forces that have come out and that have made sure that since after 1967, no national party has been able to make any real impact in Tamil Nadu. They are offspring of Periyar and his movement. So these two titans, we had spoken about them in 2 episodes of Cut the Clutter, 2 different ones separated by year and a half. One, Periyar, that was episode 670, that was more than a year ago. And also Charan Singh's birth anniversary, we had mentioned that in our episode 332, which is more than 2.5 years ago. So what we've done here is we've taken out those parts from those 2 episodes talking about these 2 great giants of Indian politics. One from the north, one from the south, but people who we tend to forget, who particularly the post-Google generation tends to forget or maybe doesn't even know anything about. So it is useful, we think, to keep on sharing these again. So we've taken out these portions from these 2 episodes of Cut the Clutter talking about the great Periyar and Chaudhry Charan Singh, the founder of Kisan politics, at least in all of North India and the Hindi heartland. So I hope you do find this useful. God is very important, and the reason we say this is a loaded reference to God in this episode of Cut the Clutter, to understand that I have to take you to Kanchipuram. Kanchipuram, as you know, is a town where the old mutt is, where the Shankaracharya of Kanchi lives, and from there the Shankaracharya gives his sermons and also gives out his advice. And the closest thing that Hindu culture might have to a papal bull or an ecclesiastical bull or an order from the clergy. Now, I have to be very careful saying those things because these are sensitive things, and one thing I don't understand well is religion, even my own. Also, my religion is very forgiving, so I don't have to remember any scriptures or remember any specific lines, etc. But I can tell you that this is one of the preeminent sort of pithas of Hinduism. Now, if you go to Kanchipuram, it's also known for its saris, for sure, for its silks. When you go to this little corner of Kanchipuram, or like a little square, where you have this temple where the Shankaracharya lives, adjoining that is also a mosque, a very large mosque, and very often you can hear the jugalbandi of the mantras from the chanting from the temple, and also calls for azan from the masjid. But what is more interesting is that facing these two, facing the temple, this preeminent temple and the large mosque, is also the bust of a man called Periyar, a man popularly known as Periyar, although his name was Erode Venkatappa Ramasamy. He was a great rationalist and iconoclast. He is facing these 2 shrines, and under his bust you find this inscription, and I will read this inscription for you. It is, "There is no God, there is no God, there is no God," 3 times over. There is no God, there is no God, there is no God. The inventor of God is a fool. The propagator of God is a scoundrel. The worshipper of God is a barbarian. Now, only in India, that's why I said, you love India for our diversity. We love our country for our diversity. Only in India, you can have a Shankaracharya, a mosque, home of a Shankaracharya, a mosque, and its greatest rationalist of all times facing them like this. In fact, there were orders earlier by the state government to remove this statue or this bust, but Madras High Court restored it. So next to the bust also is an inscription on a stone giving the order of the Madras High Court, saying that this is a man's opinion. So that opinion can be stated. There is freedom of expression in this country. Now, Periyar was the founder of Tamil rationalism or atheism or the Dravid movement. Now, once again, we are such a fascinating country. So, Periyar was somebody who was born in 1879, that is 4 years after Gandhi, 16 years before Nehru. In 1919, he joined the Congress party. 1919, just for a reference, is also the year of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. 1919, he joined the Congress party. In 1925, he left the Congress party. Why did he leave the Congress party? He left the Congress party because he thought the party was not able to fight Brahminical patriarchy, superiority, because he had had a kind of an epiphany when he went to Varanasi or Kashi, when he was in his very early 30s, I think it was 30 or 31. He went to Kashi, and the story goes that he was very hungry, so he wanted to go to one of these places where people are fed a free meal, and he was turned out because apparently he was told he's not a Brahmin, so he can't be fed at those places. So he put a sacred thread around these. Some of it could be folklore, but that's the story that is widely believed. He even put a sacred thread round his neck, again tried to go in, but then he was told that he has a mustache and Brahmins don't keep mustaches. So he got so hungry that he had to eat leftovers. And then he realized that there was this Brahminical superiority that he had to fight, and he also realized that the charity hall where he was going to eat had been funded or built by a non-Brahmin from Tamil Nadu. So his argument was that what is this? That we give Brahmins gifts, tributes, everything, and the Brahmins give us nothing. So he built this as an anti-Brahmin movement. To make it anti-Brahmin, it also was anti-God, an atheist rationalist movement. His movement was a very revolutionary movement. It was anti-caste, anti-religion, it was for gender equality, and it was for social equality. And again, he went through big changes in his mind when between 1929 and 33 or thereabouts, he traveled around the world, including the Soviet Union. These were also the years of the Great Depression. And he came back imbibing a lot of those socialist or left thoughts as well. And he came back, left the Congress, and he set up his own party. First, it was a Justice Party. Then it became Dravid Kadagam. He also started out what was called as the self-respect movement. Now, he was an iconoclast. So, he was breaking the idols of Hindu gods and goddesses everywhere. In fact, he broke a lot of idols of Ganesha, for example, because Ganesha was the most popular god in Tamil Nadu. But also, so was Kartikeya or Murugan. Now, as India came into late 40s and India became independent, his movement had begun to look a little bit too exclusivist, because not only was he against caste, against religion, very socialist in his thinking, very gender equal, all that's fine, but he also believed that Tamil Nadu should be a separate country, or Dravid Nadu as he called it, should be a separate country. So his movement or his party became separatist. But as always happens, because this became a democracy, and that is the beauty of democracies, Indian democracy attracts separatists into the mainstream. To understand how we got here, we have to also know a little bit more about how Periyar built this politics. So Periyar is somebody who is one of the great titans of Indian politics and freedom movement. He was born in 1879, which, if you put that in the right time frame in perspective, which was 4 years after Gandhi and 16 years before Nehru. And he joined the Congress party in 1919, which, for reference, happens to be the year of the Jallianwala Bagh. So it was Periyar who laid the foundations of the Dravid movement, which was a rational, atheist movement out of which DMK, ADMK, Dravid parties grew. Second short-term Prime Minister was Charan Singh. He was so short-term that he was the only Prime Minister in India's history who actually went out without ever facing Parliament. Because before he could get his vote of confidence, Congress party, which had propped him up from outside, basically to get Morarji Desai's Janata government out of power, withdrew support, and Charan Singh had to resign. So he was Prime Minister effectively only for 23 days. And then he was caretaker until the elections and until the return of Mrs. Gandhi, post-emergency, post-Janata. So he was there for a very short while. But once again, Charan Singh, he may not have been able to do very much as Prime Minister because he didn't have enough time. But the imprint he's left on India's politics and public life as India's first genuine Kisan leader. His critics sometimes said, oh, not a Kisan leader, a Kolak leader. But whatever, he has left a very strong imprint. And in fact, you have to read his biography written by American scholar Paul Brass. And also he left a very rich collection of his own papers. It's something that I did not know very much about until I attended the release of a collection of his papers that's been edited and published by Paul Brass. So you can see very rich public life, a very original leader. He was much more than just a Jat leader that his son and grandson have somehow come to be known. In the late 1960s, 1967 was the first time Congress party fell below the 300 mark in a Lok Sabha elections, and that is where forces like Charan Singh and others rose, and they then set up their coalitions. They combined some votes from this group, some votes from that group, and started building a challenge to Congress party, particularly Indira Gandhi's Congress party. So he's not somebody that history can ignore. So that is Charan Singh, a 23-day Prime Minister, although he did last a few months after that as caretaker, but that doesn't really count.